However, Jason did not even bother to look at Zoe. He just said to Grace, "Sis, what do you think? Is it enough?" At this point, no matter how much she resented Grace, Zoe could only beg her for mercy. "Grace, I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have treated your friend like that. I can apologize to your friend. Please, spare me." Grace looked at Zoe, who was crying bitterly at this moment. She knew very well that she was begging for mercy because of Jason, not because of her. Seeing the state that Zoe was in, she didn't have any sympathy for her at all. When she thought about how Lena had been treated like this, she hated her even more, and she blamed herself as well. She would rather accept the humiliation herself instead of making Lena suffer. Lena had already sacrificed so much for her. Ever since Grace was released from prison, she hadn't been able to make it up to. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. Lena, even though she had suffered such hardships because of her, then, I want you to apologize to Lena in front of everyone who witnessed the scene that day. You will also be responsible for paying the medical bills, work compensation, and so on. Grace said. Zoe nodded and agreed without hesitation. Apologies and compensations were such a small price to pay for not breaking her hand. Terence removed his foot. Zoe held the hand that had been stepped on, and she was in so much pain that she couldn't even hold her walking stick. Jason then ordered Terence, "Tell Sean to come in and take his sister away." Yes, Terence answered and retrieved Sean from outside the ward. As soon as Sean saw his sister holding her hand with tears on her face, he quickly helped her up. Then he cast a complicated look at Jason and Grace, who were sitting on the sofa. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Although he had already known that they were together, it was the first time he had seen them face to face. The woman who he had abandoned and had been dropped to the bottom of the city was now on a meteoric rise. Maybe in the future, he would have to look up to her. This kind of change in identity made him feel a kind of unspeakable anxiety. "Mr. Reed, then, I'll take my sister away now," Sean said. Jason raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "Don't you want to say hello to Grace? You should be old acquaintances." The tone he spoke the sentence with was very plain, but it made Sean feel an inexplicable fear. This, Miss Cummins and I haven't seen each other for a long time. I hope we can let bygones be bygones," he replied carefully. He could feel a cold sweat on his back gradually breaking out. However, Jason's next sentence made Sean shudder in fear. "Grace, when you had your accident, he immediately broke up with you. If you want to take your revenge, you can tell me and I will help you." Jason's words sounded like carrying out what he had just said would take close to no effort. However, when the Stevens siblings heard this, their faces changed in unison. If Jason really did help Grace take revenge on the Stevens family, then the Stevens family would lose so much to the point where they would no longer be one of the rich and powerful families in Emerald City. "Mr. Reed, Sean wanted to defend himself. However, Grace interrupted him and said to Jason, "There's no need. He had already become a stranger to me when we broke up back then. I should be thankful I got to see a relationship clearly because of a car accident." Sean's face turned pale, and he felt defeated. When Grace said these words, she didn't even look at him. "In that case, good." Jason stood up and walked up to Sean. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "You should thank her for not wanting to take revenge on you. Otherwise, by this time next year, we wouldn't see the Stevens family's businesses in this city." Sean was terrified and he was sweating all over. He could only quickly thank Grace before he helped Zoe out of the room. It was not until the two siblings left the hospital that they felt. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. Relieved. "Brother, why do you think Jason has taken an interest in Grace?" Zoe said angrily. "I've already told you not to mess with Grace," he replied in a bad mood. "Grace is simply relying on Jason for his power and authority. Without him, what is she even worth?" Zoe had just suffered so much and had been humiliated. Now she hated Grace passionately. Do you know that if she had said that she wanted revenge, the Stevens family would be in some serious trouble? At least for that, Sean was still grateful to Grace. At the very least, she did not add insult to injury. Would Jason really deal with the Stevens family for a street sweeper? What do you think? Sean rolled his eyes at his sister. Anyway, for the sake of the Stevens family, don't provoke Grace again. Or, don't come to us for help in the future because you will drag down our entire family with you if you do. Zoe still wanted to retort, but when she thought of the scene in the hospital room, she shivered and stayed silent. At that moment, in the hospital room, Jason was still standing in front of Grace. He bent down and looked at her. There was a slight smile on his handsome face and his extremely beautiful amorous eyes were shining as bright and beautiful as the moonlight. This sort of man seemed like an angel on the surface, but when he did something, it made people shudder in fear. Are you happy today, sis? Even his voice was so gentle and pleasing to the ear. Grace steadied her gaze at the man in front of her and said, You deliberately asked Sean and his sister to come here today to cause the scene. You wanted to show me that something I could never achieve in my entire life can be easily done by you. Right. Not only that, he said, I still want to tell you, sis, that I can give you everything from dignity to respect. I can even give you back your previous life. I can give you everything you hope for. He gently lifted a strand of her hair that had fallen on her shoulder. In the future, if you want to be a lawyer, or a star, or a boss, I can help you. I can help you live over everyone else so that those who looked down on you and laughed at you in the past will bow their heads in front of you. Tell me, is that okay? He whispered to her. His gentle voice was like the most beautiful voice in the world. He was presenting such a tempting gift in front of her. With his ability, he could really give it to her. But, do you want me to stay with you? That's right, he said. I can't refuse, can I? Grace asked. Jason's eyes flashed slightly, and the smile on his face disappeared little by little. He then slowly straightened up and looked down at her. No, you can refuse. I can give you the right to refuse, but, after pausing, he looked at her with a faint smile. Sis, are you sure you want to refuse? Grace felt that the air around her seemed to be frozen at this moment. If she agreed, she could indeed get a lot of things or even change her own destiny. If it had been someone else who had said these words to her, perhaps she would have agreed. But, Jason, she had a kind of fear towards this man. It was true that he had never really tried to deal with her. However, just one sentence from him had caused her much suffering in prison. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. During the 3 years of imprisonment and even the court hearing, no one dared to accept her case. After hearing that it was Jason's fiancée who had died in the car accident, even the false evidence and those witnesses who unanimously accused her of drinking made her question whether he was the one behind it all. This man was like her nightmare who pressed her down so hard that she could barely breathe. Ever since she had discovered his true identity, whenever he had approached her, her body could not help but stiffen. She would tremble whenever she had any sort of physical contact with him. How could she keep such a man by her side? After taking a deep breath, she tried to suppress the trembling in her body and said to him, Yes, I want to refuse. His face fell, and his black eyes filled with coldness. Do you really not want to stay with me? Yeah, she replied. He suddenly sneered and said, Well, I didn't expect that one day I would be rejected by a woman. Grace, think about it carefully. If you don't have my protection, what will happen to you in Emerald City? Even if the Atkinson family doesn't trouble you in the future, do you really intend to sweep the road for the rest of your life? She bit her lip and said, That's my business. His thin lips were pursed into an almost straight line, and an anger rose up from the bottom of his heart. For the first time, he had tried to do this kind of thing for a woman, but she did not appreciate it at all. Instead, she was trying her hardest to get away from him. How long had it been since he was angered to this extent? He really wanted to strangle her, but he couldn't bear to do so. I couldn't bear to. He couldn't believe that that term could be used to describe himself one day. It was truly ridiculous. Jason then left without saying a word. It was not until this moment that Grace's tensed body relaxed. When the doctor came to Grace for the daily checkup, he told her that she had recovered. The blood test showed that there was no remaining drug in her system. "Can I be discharged now?" Grace asked. "As long as Mr. Reed agrees, Miss Cummins, you can leave the hospital whenever you wish," the doctor said. Grace felt an unspeakable feeling. So, she even needed Jason's consent just to leave the hospital. "Okay, got it," she replied. After the doctor and nurse both left, she walked into the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. Reflected in the mirror was a delicate face on which were a pair of crescent-shaped eyebrows and almond eyes, a well-shaped nose, and pink lips. Under the light, there seemed to be a slight glimmer over her face. Such a face would be considered pretty good in an ordinary crowd. However, around people like Jason, there was never a lack of beauty, and she seemed inadequate by comparison. What exactly did Jason like about her? Grace smiled bitterly. Was it just because he had found her mistaking him as a homeless person at the start amusing? Was that why he had continued to keep up this brother and sister charade? She raised her hand and gently touched her lips. The memory of him kissing her flashed in her mind. Smiling face, casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. She still remembered that Lena had once said, "Grace, do you know that your lips are very beautiful?" Beautiful lips. She had never paid much attention to her lips. She only knew that her lips were not ugly, but she did not feel that they were anything special. "Yes, it's very beautiful. Your lips' shape give people an impulse to kiss you." "Oh, it's the kind of that most men would probably want to kiss." At that time, she had only thought that Lena was making fun of her. What kind of a description was that? But now, when she thought of how Jason had kissed her on the mouth, she felt a burning hot sensation on her lips. "Don't think about it anymore. Don't think about it anymore." Grace repeated this sentence to herself. Since Jason had said that he would give her a choice that day, he would surely keep to his word. A man like him would not break his promise. Let's just treat all of this as a dream. It was just a dream. In her dream, she had met a man named Jay. They had cherished each other and had a happy time together. When she woke up from her dream, she was still alone, just like before she had the dream. Grace walked out of the bathroom and began to change into the clothes she had been wearing the day she had come to the hospital. As for the rest, it was just her bag and her mobile phone. There was nothing else. Grace sat quietly on the sofa of the hospital room and waited for Jason. In the Reed residence, Terence walked to Jason's side and said, "Mr. Reed, Miss Cummins is waiting for you in the hospital room. She said that she wants to be discharged from the hospital." Terence's tone was cautious. Ever since Mr. Reed had left the hospital yesterday, he had been staying in the house and had not gone to the hospital. It could be said that he was acting abnormally. It should be noted that Mr. Reed had been mostly staying in the hospital until yesterday. Jason pursed his thin lips tightly. After a while, he said, "Other than wanting to be discharged from the hospital, did she say anything else?" "No," Terence said as he watched his boss's face sink again. Terence did not dare to utter a word. He simply waited to one side. Jason lowered his head and played with a scarf in his hand. Terence knew that the scarf had been woven by Grace as a gift for his boss. Jason casually flipped the scarf over and half closed his eyes as if he was thinking about something. After a long time, he finally stood up and said, "Let's go to the hospital." "Yes," Terence quickly replied. He followed Jason as they left the Reed residence for the hospital. When Jason walked into the ward, he saw Grace sitting on the sofa in a very upright and proper manner. Yes, proper was Jason's first impression. Her back was straight and she had placed her hands on her knees. It was a textbook sitting position. "Do you want to leave the hospital?" Jason asked. "Yeah," she hummed in reply, her gaze subconsciously falling to the scarf around his neck. That was the scarf she had personally knitted for him. At that time, she had been afraid that he would be cold and hoped that in winter he would be able to be a little warmer. However, in fact, she hadn't needed to do this at all. He had no lack of scarves or ways to keep himself warm, so he didn't need her scarf at all. "I can give you another chance to make your choice," Think carefully before you answer. Do you really not want to stay with me? He asked. In the past, he had never given anyone a second chance. However, she seemed to be an exception. Ads by Pub Future. She looked up at him and there was a kind of suffocating pressure in her eyes. Even the air around them seemed to be filled with low pressure. At this moment, she suddenly felt a sense of crisis, as if once she answered wrongly, there was a chance that she would be doomed eternally. Yes or no? As long as she stayed by Jason's side, her fate would change. But, after he got tired of the sister-brother game, what kind of fate would await her? Would her life be even more tragic than before? Besides, he was Jason, the man who had been like a nightmare to her. While she had been in prison, whenever she heard his name, she would tremble instinctively in fear. It had only gotten slightly better after she had been out of prison for a while. But if she were to stay right by him, then the fear might follow her like her own shadow and she would have no way to escape it. She swallowed the saliva in her throat and replied, "MHM. I want to be alone, and I don't want to stay with anyone." Suddenly, his face became a little darker, and the cold light in his eyes seemed to freeze her to death. "You won't regret it." There was a sense of danger in his voice. Her body couldn't help but tremble again. "No." As her voice fell, he suddenly pulled her over and threw her down on the bed. "Ah!" She cried out in alarm and struggled to get up. Subconsciously. But in the next moment, he was suddenly pressing down on her. His hands gripped her wrists tightly, reminding her of the last time he had pressed down on her in the hospital bed in the same way. "Jason, what do you want to do?" Grace cried out. "I regret it. I shouldn't have given you a choice," he said in a low voice. His lips touched her cheek and he kissed her face. His kiss was very gentle, as if he was kissing a rare treasure. However, the 10 fingers that were holding on to her wrist were exerting so much force that she could not struggle even a little. "No." She started to shake her head in a struggle to avoid his kiss. However, the kiss was like a shadow following her body. There was no way to avoid it at all. "Have you forgotten? If I wanted to, you wouldn't even have the right to say no," Jason whispered. At this moment, his cold voice seemed to be filled with emotion, making it extremely alluring. Grace's body froze. "That's right. Even if I yell right now, who is going to barge in and save me?" Saving me would be going against Jason. Who would be so stupid? When she snapped out of her trance, his lips were kissing hers and he pried open her teeth, tasting all of her sweetness. "No, I don't want it to be like this." Almost subconsciously, she suddenly bit him. In the next moment, Grace's mouth was flooded with a bloody taste and she was taken aback. "That's Jason's blood. I know. I just bit his tongue." Even so, he continued to kiss her, assertively forcing her to swallow his blood. She did not know how much time had passed. When the kiss ended, her lips felt numb and the bloody taste in her mouth was very strong. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. "Did it taste good?" he asked quietly. The corners of his lips, oh, were raised and a trickle of blood was slowly flowing down from one side of his mouth. His faint smile was complemented by the dark red blood, making it seem extra bright. She opened her mouth to speak but the taste of blood grew even stronger and saliva mixed with blood similarly trickled down from the corners of her lips. He raised a finger and gently wiped away the redness at the corner of her lips. "As a matter of fact, this is the first time a woman has drunk my blood. Sister, you have truly proven yourself to be the exception to many of my rules. Let me go, please," she begged with difficulty. "Are you that unwilling to stay by my side?" he asked, his fingers gently stroking her beautiful head of hair. His movements were tender but her body could not help shivering and her hair stood on end. "I just want to live my life peacefully." Every time she swallowed, it felt as if she was drinking his blood. "So staying by my side wouldn't be peaceful?" he asked, smilingly. He reached out his fingers and abruptly tore at her clothes. In an instant, her shoulder was exposed to the open air. Grace's entire body stiffened suddenly and she hastily shut her eyes, not moving at all. Since there's no use in struggling, the only thing I can do is to endure it passively. I already understood this principle when I was in jail. She could feel his lips kissing her neck and collarbone while his fingers touched her skin. Bear with it, bear with it. Pretend he's Jason and not Jason. She mentally repeated that sentiment to herself, but it was as if she was devoid of willpower and unable to restrain herself. She shivered even more violently until a nauseous feeling mixed with the stench of the blood rose within her. Oh! Grace abruptly opened her eyes and covered her mouth with her hand. Then, she felt the force on her loosening and she hurriedly got out of bed to rush to the toilet. She leaned over the sink and started to throw up unceasingly. She retched over the sink. She had not had much to eat that day and her stomach was empty, so she only vomited some bile and nothing else. Her body trembled continuously as she vomited. Only when she felt as if she had vomited to the point of collapse and could not throw up any more bile did she slowly raise her head to glance out of the washroom. The man's tall silhouette stood right outside the washroom, his handsome face shrouded with a layer of gloom. His dark eyes stared at her coldly. Are you that disgusted by me? Her face was pale and she curled up her body as if she were trying to put 1,000 miles of distance between them. Jason pursed his lips tightly. When have I ever had to desire a woman like this? I'm Jason. What kind of woman can't I have in Emerald City? And she's just an ordinary woman. Even if she's slightly interesting, I won't lower myself to chasing a woman who is so disgusted by me. Alright, Grace, since you're so disgusted, I'll let you leave, Jason said coldly. His beautiful and amorous eyes were cold with ads by Pub Future Frost. However, that being said, if you regret it in the future, I won't ever want you again. Jason, never give anyone a second chance. When he was done talking, he turned to leave the ward. Grace propped herself up with her arms over the sink, seemingly using up all of her energy just to not slump to the floor. Does this mean I can leave the hospital? She rearranged her torn clothes and combed her hair, then looked at her pale self in the mirror, unable to help smiling wryly. When Grace left the hospital, she was suddenly surrounded by a group of people. It's her. That's the Grace who killed someone. Oh my God, she really is staying in this hospital. She killed someone and I heard she was only in prison for 3 years before being released. 3 years for a human life. She got off too easy. Lily was sad for a long period of time over the death of her sister all those years ago. Lily was sad all because of her. She caused Lily to lose her sister. Not only were they slandering Grace, they were also throwing rotten vegetables and stinky eggs at her. Even though Grace tried hard to dodge them, she was still struck by a large amount of waste. Furthermore, there were reporters nearby taking pictures of her as if they were producing a news report. In a black Bentley parked not far away, Terence noticed that Grace was in an embarrassing situation. He then turned to look at Jason, who was sitting in the backseat silently with a cold expression on his face, and he could not help asking, Mr. Reed, should I go help Miss Cummins? No need, Jason replied coldly. Since she's not willing to stay by my side, then she should understand that she needs to endure this. These people must be Miss Lily's fans. They probably saw the news that had been published online about Miss Cummins being hospitalized here. That's why they're here at the hospital entrance intercepting Miss Cummins, Terence explained. He had looked into the motives of the people staking out the hospital. This is actually an insignificant matter. I had never even considered that Grace would be unwilling to stay by Mr. Reed's side and try to leave the hospital all by herself. Everyone knows that in Emerald City, there are many women who would love to stay by Mr. Reed's side, and yet Grace refused him. Terence remained silent. Jason studied the scene beyond the car windows with a cold expression. A moment later, it was as if he was too lazy to look any longer. So he gradually shut his eyes and ordered, "Let's go." Yes, Terence replied. The car slowly drove away from the hospital entrance. Terence did not notice his boss's hands on his knees clenching repeatedly until they slowly formed into fists. That's an extreme amount of restraint. Grace returned to the rental apartment in a state of embarrassment. It has only been a few days since I left for Thanksgiving in return, but it feels like I've experienced a whole lifetime in that period. She studied the cramped rental apartment and felt as if there was a chilliness in the air. Grace could not help smiling wryly. From now on, I'll stay here alone once again. No one will accompany me and talk to me in the still of the night. Moreover, no one will smile as they call me sister. She grabbed a set of fresh clothes and washed away her shame before starting to tidy up the house. Although Jason was here for only a short time, there are so many traces of him in the house. The cutlery, towel, and toothbrush he was using as well as the clothes and shoes he wore. She cleared up everything and placed them all in a cardboard. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Ads by Pub Future. Box. Why not throw them away? She asked herself. Keeping these things will just take up space, but I'd rather keep them. It might sound funny, but I actually miss the days I spent with Jay. That Jason was clearly an illusion. He was a fake created by Jason, but my feelings for Jason were real. I was so happy on the days I had Jason, as if I was finally not going to be alone anymore. Grace finally picked up the half-knitted gloves she had placed by her headboard. I had wanted to wait until after Thanksgiving to find the time to continue knitting these gloves for him to wear. And yet, now, I will never have the opportunity to finish these gloves. She put the gloves as well as the needles and yarn into the cardboard box. She then took some tape to seal the box, placing it in a corner of the house. I'll still be living by myself in the future. Jason is nothing but a man from my dreams, Grace thought to herself. At night, she did not turn off the lights and slept with them on. Back when I left prison and didn't have Jason, I would keep the lights on when I went to sleep because the darkness reminded me of when I was in jail. But then, Jason lived with me. I didn't know when I started to not need the lights on to fall asleep. But now it seems as if this habit has reappeared. Grace gave Lena a call to inform her good friend that she had returned to the rental apartment. Will you be at the rental apartment tomorrow? I'll come and find you, Lena said. Yes, I'll be here, she replied. It seems that other than the rental apartment, I have nowhere else I can go. Grace was unable to sleep for the entire night. Whenever she shut her eyes, she could only see Jason's face and the scent of blood was still lingering in her mouth, unwilling to disappear. She had gargled countless times throughout the night, but that bloody stench was still very distinct. The next day, Lena arrived at the rental apartment, and when she noticed Grace's tired appearance, she hurriedly asked, I only saw the news this morning. Were you surrounded at the hospital entrance when you tried to leave yesterday? Are you hurt? Grace shook her head and replied, I was only a bit embarrassed, but not hurt. Lena was angry and distraught when she saw the self-deprecating expression on her friend's face. I'm angry that those people who surrounded and scolded her knew nothing about the incident, and yet they treated an innocent woman like that. I'm distraught that my friend clearly had not been drinking, but she was indicted on a charge of driving under the influence. They were still perplexed by the material evidence and the unanimous testimony provided by the witnesses to this very day. How dare those people treat you that way? They only criticize others from a moral high ground without knowing anything at all, Lena said indignantly. Grace calmly replied, it means nothing to me. Lena recalled all the pain in her friend's body and could not help sighing. When I first welcomed Grace after she had left prison, I noticed all the wounds on her. There were both fresh and old ones. Although Grace has never told me about what she endured in prison, I can probably guess. I'm afraid Grace went through all sorts of hardships in prison. Is Jai really Jason? Lena asked, changing the topic of smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Ads by Pub Future. Conversation. Yes, Grace nodded. But, if he's Jason, why would he pretend to be a homeless person and stay with you in the rental apartment for so long? She asked. I can't seem to figure out this point. Does Jason have some peculiar interests? It's nothing but a game to him, Grace replied rather bitterly. When I heard him say that with my own ears, I felt as if I was suffocating. Jason, who treated me so well, warmed my hands, waited by the door for me, and quietly listened to my woes, was nothing more than an illusion he created for a game. How absurd, and yet, how real. A game. Lena was perplexed. Yes, those rich people are probably bored by their lives and wanted to play a game to kill time, Grace replied softly. Lena was momentarily unsure of how to comfort her friend. I know that my friend hates and fears deception the most. Jason undoubtedly dealt Grace a heavy blow. Grace raised her head and gave Lena a faint smile. I'm fine, don't worry. Besides, I don't have a relationship with him anymore. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. His game is probably over. Anyway, I didn't lose much. I've just returned to living by myself. But her smile gave Lena an urge to cry. Then I'll move in and live with you. You don't have to, Lena. I don't want you to fight with your family members over me again, Grace said. I know you're nice to me. But I'm sure you wouldn't want me to feel guilt over you whenever we spend time together. I already owe you enough. Don't say anything about owing. We're best friends. When someone lost money in class, you were the only one who believed me and helped me to catch the thief. Grace, you believed me then and helped me. Now, I believe you and I'll help you too. Lena exclaimed. Ever since that incident all those years ago, I've known that Grace will be my best friend for life. Thank you, Grace muttered. When I helped Lena all those years ago, I was barely lifting a finger, but now, Lena has sacrificed so much to help me. That's right, what are your plans for the future? Lena asked. What else can I do? I'll go back to work at the sanitation service center after the holidays, Grace replied. But the news of you being surrounded at the hospital entrance has already been uploaded to the internet. By now the sanitation service center must know all about the incident. From 3 years ago. How will your colleagues treat you? Lena said worriedly. Don't worry, it's fine, Grace answered. Because actually, everyone at the sanitation service center already knows about the accident that caused Jennifer Atkinson's death and my 3 years in prison. The man reclining on the sofa held his cheek with one hand and a glass of red wine in the other, sipping from it occasionally. The man looked beautiful and innocent, and there was a hint of allure that unwittingly emanated from between his brows. It was as if a slight glance from him could make anyone fall deep into the tightly woven net within his eyes, unable to escape or leave, I willingly falling into his trap. And it's no wonder that so many ladies of note in Emerald City have feelings for him. Patrick studied Jason as he drank alone, and could not help sighing internally. But they're all feelings and few people have turned those feelings into actions. After all, those who have taken action have irritated Mr. Reed and ended up miserable, even becoming a joke in Emerald City. Why are you here drinking alone? If you're here to meet your friends, you should at least bring that woman I really want to meet. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Ads by Pub Future. What kind of woman could make you abandon your old master on Thanksgiving? Patrick asked. I'm so curious about this woman. Although Jason said that it was just a game on the phone that day and that there was no good reason to meet her. But I've never seen Jason play any games with other women. Therefore, Patrick was dubious of Jason's statement. Gripping the wine glass, Jason's fingers faltered a little. He raised his breathtakingly beautiful and amorous eyes and stared at Patrick with a faint smile on his face. Oh, do you really want to meet her? Patrick's hair stood on end immediately and a sense of crisis arose within him. It feels like if I nod now, I'll come to no good end. It's as if what I said just now broke his taboo. A woman is Jason's taboo. Does that mean that the woman is actually important to Jason, or am I overthinking things? Patrick figured that he was overthinking and immediately flashed Jason an embarrassed smile. I don't want to meet her. Happy. As they were talking, two figures suddenly walked in. Through the entrance, Patrick hurriedly changed the topic of conversation. It's Brian, that kid. He's bringing that new girlfriend again today. Why does this kid keep looking for starlets as his girlfriends for the past 2 years? He makes one famous, then finds another to make her famous. How many starlets does he wish to make famous? Patrick was made speechless by the speed at which Brian changed girlfriends. And yet, Brian doted on every one of his girlfriends while he was with them, giving them anything they wanted. However, once they broke up, he was frustratingly frank and ruthless. Some even said that Brian was heartless. Even if he excessively doted on a woman, he would cast her aside like an old shoe in the blink of an eye once he tired of her. Just then, Evelyn took Brian's arm and entered the magnificent banquet hall with him. I'd never even dared to think of visiting such places before. Now I'm so nurtured in the film crew, and Brian also said that I could be the female lead in my next television series. To me, this is like winning the lottery. Previously, just to ensure that my characters could have a little more dialogue, I had to continuously curry favor with all the screenwriters, assistant, katakana middle dot, directors, and so on. Even if I drank with them and laughed at their jokes, it would sometimes not even be possible. Now all it takes is for Brian to say the word and I can be the female lead. But my biggest prize is being Brian's girlfriend. The only thing I regret is that although Brian dotes on me in ways which could be considered meticulous, buying me the branded bags and luxury clothes I could only look at in the past and so on, whenever I want to be intimate with him, he only calmly says, "There's no need for that." Even when she tried to kiss him, he would not allow her to do one. That made her feel ill at ease. After all, he kept switching girlfriends. Everybody knew that he would get tired of whoever he was. With every few months, Evelyn was determined to capture his heart. She needed to get herself into his good books, as she wanted to continue staying by his side. The longer she stayed with him, the more things she could get from him. After getting used to the comfortable life that he had provided her with, she didn't want to go back to the kind of life that she had lived in the past. Moreover, Evelyn glanced at Brian's good-looking face from the side. He could easily capture the average woman's heart, and smiling face casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. She was no different. She wanted to be close to him not only because of the good life that he could give her. She wanted him and desired to be intimate with him. When his almond-shaped eyes met hers, her heart would throb. She felt stirred up and desired him. She would use any means to get hold of this man. "My friend is here today. Let me introduce you to him." Brian's voice sounded in her ears. "Sure," she replied submissively. Needless to say, his friend would surely be wealthy and respectable. However, she was stunned when she saw Brian's friend. "Is this man Brian's friend? He resembles the man I saw in Grace's rental apartment." Brian's friend's attire was different and his bangs were styled back, revealing his smooth and full forehead. It was different from the man in the rental apartment who had bangs covering his forehead. They may not be the same person. As the thought flashed through her mind, Brian whispered to her, "Evelyn, this is Jason. You can offend anyone in Emerald City, but not him. If you do that, even I will not be able to protect you." 100. Although Brian was speaking to her nonchalantly, Evelyn felt thunderstruck. Brian had been protecting her ever since they had gotten together, and he had never mentioned not protecting her. Is this man Jason? The man who is well known in Emerald City, but whose photo never appears online? Jason raised his brows lazily as he looked at Evelyn. Evelyn was quick to react. She immediately put on a smile and greeted him, "Mr. Reed, nice to meet you. I'm Evelyn." Jason curled his lips and smiled derisively. "I see. It's you, Evelyn. I hadn't expected to meet you again." A shiver suddenly ran down Evelyn's spine. Is he? Jason, do you know her?" When Patrick heard Jason's comment, he found it strange. Evelyn was a third-rate actress, and it was unlikely for her to be acquainted with Jason. "Yes, we've met once before," Jason replied flatly. Evelyn widened her eyes, her heart almost jumping out of her chest. "He's the man who was living together with Grace. Back then, she had reckoned that he had met Grace in prison. Evelyn had not expected him to be Jason, the man who called the shots in Emerald City. She almost fainted. "What's happening?" Why was Jason living with Grace in the run-down rental apartment? Brian was surprised as he looked at Jason and Evelyn. He then asked, Evelyn, I never heard you mention that you knew. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. Jason. Evelyn shivered. She smiled wryly and said, I didn't know it back then. I mean, I didn't know that he was Mr. Reed. After saying that, she apologized to Jason, saying, Mr. Reed, I'm sorry for having offended you previously. That was all a misunderstanding. However, Jason ignored Evelyn. He looked at Brian and said, in the future, don't bring this woman to me. I don't want to see her. When Evelyn heard that, her face turned pale and she dared not say a word. A light flashed through Brian's eyes and he looked bewildered. After Brian left with Evelyn, Patrick walked over to Jason eagerly and asked, has Brian's new girlfriend offended you? Jason merely lifted the half-full glass of wine in his hand and knocked it back. After seeing Evelyn, Jason thought of Grace. If she had stayed by his side, she could have enjoyed a better life and would not have had to continue doing the dirty and tiring job of being a sanitation worker. She would no longer have had to be at the mercy of others, but she had turned him down. She had seemed disgusted when he touched her. He had been telling himself that she was just like any other woman and he did not have to care about her. However, he was becoming more and more frustrated at that thought. As for Evelyn, she looked at Brian, feeling ill at ease as she asked, Brian, have I offended Mr. Reed? In the future, steer clear of him, Brian said. He sized Evelyn up and asked, how did you meet Jason? I met him at my sister's rental apartment, but Mr. Reed wasn't dressed like this. As my family and my sister were having a dispute back then, we had a conflict with Mr. Reed. Evelyn tried to make it sound as though it was nothing serious as she was afraid that Brian would dump her upon discovering that she had offended Jason. Brian was surprised to hear that. A rental apartment. A sister. Could that be the same woman Patrick told me Jason left Reed group behind to save on Thanksgiving? I didn't know that he was Jason. If this will affect you, I can apologize to him. Brian, don't be angry with me. I will be good and behave myself, Evelyn said. Her eyes turned misty and she looked pitiful. Brian lifted his hand and touched her lips gently. This was a gesture that he was fond of doing. He favored her lips and had told her that they were attractive. However, it was strange that he had never kissed her. Even after touching her lips, he would use a clean handkerchief to wipe his fingers, as if she was dirty. Evelyn was puzzled by his actions, but she dared not ask him about it. You don't have to apologize to me. You're my girlfriend and you only need to care about me. As for anything else, you don't have to bother about it, Brian said. His actions were gentle, as if he was stroking something precious. However, his voice sounded cold and aloof. At times, Evelyn felt that she could not understand him. She had no idea what was going on in his mind or what his desires were. I understand, Evelyn stuttered. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Ads by Pub Future. Brian withdrew his hand and, as usual, took out his handkerchief to wipe his fingers. Evelyn bit her lip. She was determined to capture his heart one day and become his final girlfriend. She wanted to marry him in the future. That was the vow that she had secretly made to herself. The holidays ended in no time. Grace went back to the sanitation service center to work. Many of her colleagues had read about the news that someone had thrown eggs and vegetables at her outside the hospital, and they had started to gossip about her. Grace, don't get us into trouble. What if someone comes to our sanitation service center and throws eggs and vegetables at us? That's right. My parents are worried about me because they know that my colleague is an ex-convict. Lily has so many fans. Back then, Grace knocked her sister down and killed her. Lily was close to her sister, and many of her fans felt sorry for her. I dare not imagine what other actions they might take in the future. It would be terrible if we got hurt. Because of you. The staff in the sanitation service center spoke derisively to Grace. However, she kept quiet and shrugged it off. After all, she badly needed the job for her own survival. If she was dismissed, it would be tough for her to find another job. WWW. Claire said to her, ignore these people. They can't wait to see you leave. It won't be easy to get a new job now, and even if you manage to find one, your new colleagues there will gossip about you too. I know, Grace replied. She then lowered her head and focused on sweeping the streets. Suddenly, someone hurried in her direction and knocked into her. She staggered back a few steps, almost falling to the ground. After the man had knocked into her, he left hastily without apologizing to her. Grace, are you okay? Claire asked as she went over to Grace after seeing what had taken place. I'm fine, Grace said, shaking her head. Although the impact had been great, she was not injured. That man was so rude. He did not even apologize after knocking into you, Claire said angrily. Grace was used to this kind of person. They looked down on sanitation workers, and even if they knocked into one, they would push the blame on them. Forget it, Claire, it's no big deal, Grace said as she and Claire continued sweeping the streets. After knocking off from work, Grace changed out of her uniform. She found a silver bracelet in one of her pockets. When did this bracelet get into my pocket? Grace was puzzled. As she was on the night shift, not many people were around. She put away the bracelet and decided to put it at the lost and found counter the following day. When she got back to the rental apartment, it was dark and quiet. In the past, when she got back from her night shift, the house had been bright because Jason had always been waiting for her. However, when Grace switched on the light, the room was empty. She could not help smiling wryly. When she lay in bed, she took out the bracelet. It must have belonged to a child and the design looked ordinary. She recalled ads by Pub Future that she had had a similar one when she was young. She wondered how the bracelet had ended up in her pocket. Suddenly, she remembered the man who had knocked into her. During the day, this bracelet could belong to him. However, at one glance, she saw that the bracelet looked worthless. She wondered if the man would come back to look for it. Grace let out a sigh and decided not to dwell on it. She would report it to Sanitation Service Center the following day. She was not aware that the man who had knocked into her had been besieged by a group of people in a hotel room. He was beaten up and being interrogated by them. The man regretted his actions. He wouldn't have stolen the bracelet from Brian if he had known that he would get into serious trouble. From Brian's outfit, he had reckoned that he was rich. He had thought that he was fortunate to have caught such a big fish. Sir, I have no idea about the bracelet that you mentioned. I did see the bracelet and put it in my pocket. I swear that. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. I have no idea why it is not in my pocket anymore. The man cried as he knelt in front of Brian, his face covered in blood. Brian sat gracefully on the sofa, his handsome face looking cold as he said, "Where is the bracelet? You can ask for anything. But you have to return the bracelet to me. If you don't, I will break your hand." The man was scared out of his wits. If he had known that the bracelet was so important, he wouldn't have taken it and put it in his pocket. He had left in a hurry and knocked into someone. Suddenly, the man recalled something and said immediately, "I remember it now. Someone must have picked up the bracelet. I knocked into a sanitation worker who was sweeping the floor earlier. The bracelet must have dropped out of my pocket and the sanitation worker could have picked it up." The few men who were holding the man down looked at Brian upon hearing that. "Mr. Hart, what should we do?" "Check Go and find out where the sanitation worker is. Brian said coldly. The bracelet had been his only consolation all these years and he had to get it back by all means. He was willing to pay any price to get it back. He had a feeling that he would never be able to find the person if he were to lose the bracelet. Suddenly, Grace woke up from her sleep. The room was bright as she had kept the lights on. She reached out for her cell phone to look at the time. It was 3 a.m., and she could sleep for a few more hours. Just as she was about to shut her eyes, she suddenly sat bolt upright. The next instant, she stared in disbelief, her eyes wide open. A man was sitting by the dining table in her rental apartment, playing with the silver bracelet that had been in her pocket. Under the light, the man looked like a painting that'd been drawn on a piece of rice paper. His brows were thick, and his ads by Pub Future nasal bridge was high. His lips were thin, and he had a pair of beautiful phoenix eyes. When he curled his lips and looked at her, he seemed cold and aloof. As he looked at her, Grace felt as if he was a mirage. Is this man real? Am I dreaming? Are you awake? The man's voice broke the silence in the room. Grace suddenly came to her senses and realized that she was not dreaming. Everything was real. You, who are you? Why are you in my apartment in the middle of the night? Grace tried her best not to scream. She quietly stretched out her hand to pick up her cell phone so that she could call the police when the man was not watching her. However, before she could get her hands on the cell phone, the man said, "If you are thinking of calling the police, you can forget about it. If I wanted to harm you, I would have done so while you were sleeping." Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Grace froze at his words. The man seemed to have read her mind. Why are you? This is my bracelet, Brian said as he stood up. He slowly made his way to the bed and said, "It was stolen today. I didn't steal it. When I saw it, it was already in my pocket." Grace explained immediately. "I know you didn't steal it," Brian said. "If it was you, you wouldn't still be here in one piece." Grace bit her lip and grabbed hold of the quilt tightly. This man seemed cold and dangerous. She wondered when he had entered her rental apartment without her realizing it. When she saw him playing with the bracelet, she believed that he had been there for some time. However, she hadn't noticed it. After thinking for a while, she concluded that he must be something special. No ordinary man could search her out and get into her apartment unnoticed. When the man got near her, she noticed that his attire was high quality. His suit and wristwatch were branded and expensive. However, she found it puzzling that this kind of man would barge into her apartment for the sake of a cheap bracelet. Wait, Grace suddenly shivered. She looked at the man with even more confusion. How had he known that the bracelet was with her? She had found it in the pocket of her work uniform when she had gotten off work. However, this man had known that the bracelet was with her. Then, he had even found out where she lived and silently barged in. To be able to do such a thing, who on earth was this man? "You picked up this bracelet, what reward do you want? As long it isn't too excessive, I can give it to you." Brian lowered his head and looked down at the woman in front of him. He had planned to leave directly with the bracelet, but when smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Ads by Pub Future. He saw the woman's sleeping face. He had decided to remain in the house. He thought, maybe, he wanted to see what this woman looked like when she opened her eyes. Now, she had really awoken. She had a pair of extremely beautiful almond eyes, the deep and dark pupils clearly contrasting with the sclera. The eyelashes that curled upwards added a bit of charm to this pair of eyes. It was just that when this pair of eyes opened, the gaze that emerged was filled with a kind of lifeless apathy that didn't match her age. It was as if she had gone through too much hardship and had already lost the vibrance that she ought to have. Now, She was, instead, resigned to her fate. Grace did not know who the man in front of her was. However, he seemed to have a similar temperament to Jason. In her current situation, she could not afford to provoke such a person. This bracelet just happened to be in the pocket of my work uniform. It can't be said that I picked it up, so you don't need to reward me, Grace said. Smiling face, casual date is just a click away. Brian raised his eyebrows. He hadn't expected that a woman who lived in such a small house and did cleaning work would directly refuse the reward he offered. Even if I could give you a reward that could change your life, you wouldn't want it, he said. Grace could not help but think of what Jason had said to her back then. These two people were indeed very similar. Both of them seemed to be able to easily change other people's lives. However, this was her life. She didn't want to be controlled by others. She just wanted to be the master of her own fate. No, thanks. This bracelet has been returned to its rightful owner and I didn't do anything to help, Grace replied. Brian's face sank slightly and he tilted his body a little. His face drew close to hers, and his pair of pitch-black phoenix eyes seemed to be scrutinizing her. Grace subconsciously tightened her grip on the blanket covering her body and she glared at the man in front of her. She did not know who this man was or what he wanted to do. However, he had been able to enter the room silently at night. Easily. If he really wanted to do something to her, she might not be able to stop him at all. The two people looked at each other in silence. After a long while, the man's cold and indifferent voice finally sounded again. Are you saying that to get more benefits? Are you playing hard to get? She was stunned for a moment and then said, I don't have that ability, and I can't play hard to get with you. What's more, I don't even know who you are. Since you have obtained the bracelet, can you leave? I have to go to work early in the morning, and I want to sleep for another 2 hours. He slowly straightened up, holding the small silver bracelet with his slender fingers. As his gaze fell on her face, he opened his thin lips and said lightly, I'm Brian. Now, you should know who I am. Grace had heard Brian's name before. After all, the Hart family was in charge of all kinds of businesses within the entertainment industry. Some even said that in the entertainment industry, whoever Brian wanted to be successful would become successful. If Brian wanted to suppress someone, then they would never be able to be successful for the rest of their lives. From this, one could tell how influential Brian was in the entertainment industry. When she had been dating Sean, she had once heard Sean mention him. Although the Stevens family was also considered rich and powerful in the city, compared to the aristocratic Hart family, the Stevens family was lacking. Sean, of course, was not qualified to make friends with Brian. As for the other hearsay, it had come from the mouths of those gossipy women in the sanitation service center. It was said that Brian was indifferent and difficult to get along with, but he never was short of girlfriends. Smiling face, casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. He had also made all of his girlfriends famous, but once they broke up, he would be very decisive and brisk, even capable of being cold-blooded and ruthless. However, although he was the crown prince of the entertainment industry, he had never two-timed. When he was in a relationship with a woman, no matter how short the time was, during this period of time, he would only associate with that woman and would not be unfaithful. This was also the reason why he was not cursed on the internet. After all, they were adults, and they were all consenting. It could even be said that the women who had been in a relationship with him had all gained great benefits. Therefore, there were also many women who dreamed of having a relationship with Brian. After all, they could gain a lot from it. And if they were doted on like a treasure by a handsome man, even if it was short-lived, it would be like a fireworks moment of brilliance. Grace had never expected that it would be Brian who had barged into her rental apartment in the middle of the night. Furthermore, Brian had barged in just to retrieve an unremarkable silver bracelet. It seemed like the silver bracelet was very important to him. Alas, the Crown Prince and Emily broke up again. It seems that he's now dating a third-rate celebrity. Grace had been returning her tools while the girls in the sanitation service center were chatting about Brian's gossip. Who's the third-rate celebrity? She actually defeated Emily. She hasn't been exposed yet, that'll probably take a few more days. But it hasn't been too bad for Emily. If she hadn't been dating the Crown Prince, she wouldn't have become a first-rate star so easily. So thinking about it, she has also gained a lot. I really hope that I can meet the Crown Prince one day. If he likes me, even if he only wants one night with me, I'll be willing. In your dreams. The young girls were laughing and gossiping as they browsed the online forums. Grace did not know what they would think if they knew that she had met Brian in the middle of the night. Grace, what's wrong with you? Claire said. Nothing. She came back to her senses, returned the tools, and changed out of her work uniform. When she put on her casual clothes, she looked at the scar on the palm of her right hand. This was from the night of Thanksgiving. In order to wake herself up, she had gripped some broken pieces of mirror. Fortunately, it had not injured the tendons of her hand. After a few more days, the scar on her palm would fade away, just like the memory of what had happened between her and Jason. As time passed, it would disappear as if nothing had happened. Grace gently balled her hands into fists and walked out of the sanitation service center. Before she could get very far, a silver-gray Porsche blocked her way. A slender figure got out of the car. It was the protagonist, who had been being discussed by the girls in the sanitation service center. Brian, is there something wrong? Grace asked. I want to treat you to a meal to thank you, Brian said. He directly opened the passenger seat door, clearly indicating that he wanted Grace to get into the car. I didn't do anything to help you with your bracelet, so you don't need to thank me, Grace said, raising her foot to try to get past him. However, just after she had taken a step, he suddenly raised his hand and blocked her way. His phoenix eyes were fixed on smiling face. Casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Ads by Pub Future. But his gaze seemed to be concealed behind a facade, flashing with a kind of look that she couldn't understand. I'm not used to owing favors, so I must treat you to this meal, he said in a tone that could not be refused, the look in his phoenix eyes becoming deeper. Grace bit her lips slightly. A person like Brian probably hadn't been rejected by others before. The more she refused, the more likely it was that the other party would become more and more persistent. It was better for her to go and eat this meal. Anyway, if he really wanted to do something bad to her, he would have already done so last night. Grace did not say anything else and sat in the passenger seat. Brian closed the door, walked back to the driver's seat, and drove off. Along the way, Grace could not help but smile bitterly as she looked out at the view that was constantly flashing past. Back when she had just graduated from college and become a lawyer, she had felt that everything could be reasoned out. However, after experiencing so much, she realized that sometimes, it simply depended on whether the other party, smiling face casual date is just a click away, wanted to be reasoned with. If the other party didn't want to listen to reason, then she wouldn't even have a chance to reason with them. What are you thinking about? Brian's voice suddenly sounded from within the car. I'm thinking about that silver bracelet. It seems to be of great importance to you, she said casually. A faint smile appeared on Brian's indifferent face. It's very important. Since it's so important, will the person who stole it yesterday have a miserable end? She asked. He glanced at her from the corner of his eyes and said, well, yes, quite miserable. His voice was very light, but she thought, I'm afraid that the person who stole from him really will not meet a good end. The car stopped in front of a restaurant. Grace knew that this restaurant was rather famous in Emerald City. However, it was very difficult to book a table. And the prices were very high. Eating a simple meal would cost the equivalent of an ordinary person's salary of 1 or 2 years, let alone if one were to order some special dishes. Ordinary people could not afford it at all. However, for a person like Brian, coming here for a meal was probably an extremely common occurrence. The two of them entered the restaurant. Brian took Grace into a private room. What would you like to eat? Brian asked. Anything is fine, Grace replied. Finally, it was Brian who ordered. With a full table of dishes. The spread was unusually abundant. As Grace ate the dishes, she still could not figure out exactly what Brian wanted to do. Did he really just want to thank her, so he was treating her to a meal? Miss Cummins used to be Sean's girlfriend. Brian suddenly asked halfway through the meal. Grace's hand suddenly froze on the chopsticks. She lowered her head and said, yes. Indeed, people like him would have already investigated her thoroughly before having a meal with her. The reason you broke up with him was because of the car accident that year. He continued to ask. So what if it was? She lifted her head and asked back, Mr. Hart, the person whom I knocked down and killed back then, was Jason's fiancée. In Emerald City, who would dare to associate with me? I dare, he said. Grace was stunned. She looked at the person in front of him with a surprised expression, and her mind suddenly went blank. What do you think? Do you want to try being with me? He asked. Smiling face, casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Ads by Pub Future. Hearing these words, not only did Grace not have any ambiguous feelings, she felt her scalp go numb. The man in front of her, with a distant and indifferent expression on his face, had said these words as if she was just an object to him. Just an object that he had taken an interest in. As far as I know, Mr. Hart, you seem to have gotten a new girlfriend just recently, she said, referring to the gossip she had heard at the sanitation service center earlier. Yes, there's indeed a woman, but if you go out with me, I will break up with her, he said in a serious tone. What was he joking about? Grace suddenly had a funny feeling. It seemed that this crown prince was really casual when it came to getting into a relationship with someone. Why? She was puzzled. When it came to her appearance, it had been a few years ago, she wouldn't have looked too bad. However, after 3 years of imprisonment, in addition to facing the sun and wind every day and neglecting proper maintenance, there was really nothing about her that could attract anyone's attention. Your face looks pretty good. I like it, he said. My face. She couldn't help touching her face. She didn't think that her face was any better than those of the actresses in the entertainment industry. What's more, there were a variety of beautiful actresses who were willing to be his girlfriend. Especially your eyes, he said. Your eyes are very beautiful. Yet your gaze is too bitter and too heavy. As he said this, his eyes kept staring into hers. What do you think? Do you want to date me? He appeared casual, but the look in his eyes seemed to penetrate her, making her unable to breathe. Grace stood up abruptly. I'm going to the ladies' room. She looked for an excuse and then left the private room in a hurry. Brian gently lowered his eyes, a hint of playfulness appearing around the corners of his lips. In a daze, Grace looked at her own face in the washroom's mirror. She had not applied makeup on her thin face. It was only acceptable at most. As for her eyes, she had never thought that her eyes were beautiful. At most, they were pleasant looking. They were definitely not the kind of eyes that would stun people. Could it be that Brian had truly taken a fancy to her? Or was this just a whim of his? Just like Jason, he felt that she was novel and wanted to play a game. When she thought of Jason, Grace could only feel a stabbing pain in her heart once again. Her joy was no longer there. That man in her heart, who had been so pure and clean, was no longer there. Shaking her head, Grace had just walked out of the washroom when someone suddenly rushed in front of her, raised a hand, and slapped her. Pa! A crisp slapping sound rang out. Due to how abrupt it was, Grace had no time to react. It was not until she felt a burning sensation on her face that she realized what had happened. You must be that vamp, the other party said hatefully. I hadn't been expecting you to ask Brian to bring you to a place like this for dinner. You are just a third-rate celebrity. Do you really think you'll be able to secure the position of being his girlfriend? Let me tell you, it won't be long before you're dumped by him. Grace looked up. Surprisingly, she recognized who the person who had slapped her was. Emily had originally been a second-tier actress who often played some supporting roles. However, after getting together with Brian, she had become famous with his support. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Ads by Pub Future. Some had previously wondered if Emily would be Brian's last girlfriend. After all, Emily had been the one to stand by Brian's side the longest. However, unexpectedly, Emily had ultimately ended up as just another ex-girlfriend. You've mistaken me for someone else, Grace said. I'm not mistaken. You came here with Brian tonight, didn't you? Emily looked at the woman in front of her jealously. She felt that the woman in front of her couldn't be compared to herself. Even her clothes were incomparably shabby. How long do you think you can stay with Brian? If he dumped me today, he could also dump you tomorrow. Grace looked at her coldly. It's none of my business whether he wants you or not, but the relationship between me and him is not like you think, so please apologize to me. She suddenly did not want to endure it anymore. She had had to endure everything when she had been facing Jason, and she was having to endure everything now she was facing Brian. However, now that she was encountering this unexpected misfortune, she did not want to suffer the slap in vain. Even if she was now on the lowest rung of society, and even if prison had worn away all of her sharpness and edges, it did not mean that she could be beaten and scolded as others pleased. If she was how she had been back then. Apologize. You want me to apologize to a shameless vamp who hooks up with another person's boyfriend? Dream on. Don't think that Brian is yours. He won't touch you at all. You're just someone who can be replaced at any time, Emily said, jealously. At this time, she didn't look as gentle and quiet as she had ordinarily on TV and in the news. She looked like a shrew, swearing on the street. At this moment, some people who were going in and out of the washroom also stopped to watch the scene. Some of them had already recognized that one of the women was the popular star, Emily. However, those who could come to this restaurant for a meal were not ordinary citizens. No one took out their phone to take videos or photos. You're not going to apologize? Grace asked. Do you need me to say it multiple times? How can I apologize to someone like you? Before Emily could finish her words, Grace suddenly raised her hand and slapped her on the cheek. Pa! The crisp sound rang out again.